Hello, everybody. This is Ronaldo Madrinian again, and I'm here to talk about the Break RPG. Specifically, today we're going to be talking about adversary creation as a sort of foil to last stream, which was all focused on character creation. This is mainly because I want to show the game has tools for the game master as well. It's of course all well and good to have players have lots of options, but you don't want to throw um, like GMs out there without anything to work with and that sort of thing. And as much as Gray and I would love to basically make hundreds and hundreds of monsters and NPCs and well GMCs, we'll get to that, to use in your break game, um, right in the book, it's kind of impractical. So I thought what we decided on instead was kind of a handful of different adversaries to kind of show the sort of uh, different ends of the spectrum of how these entities could be used, and also we included rules on how to make your own or how to customize existing ones. And today we're going to be going over that. So let's go ahead and begin. Oh, well, I should just keep that face on for the stream. Hopefully that's all of your faces right now. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So right now I have pulled up here is a good example of a break adversary. Um, Before I kind of dig into this, I want to break down what I mean when I say when we talk about adversary in the adversary section and that sort of thing. Um, in break, the sort of any entity, any sort of individual or entity controlled by the game master rather than by the players is referred to as a game master entity. Um, the NPC is usually the non-player character is obviously the common nomenclature, and obviously that's still going to be in use in like you can still use that instead of GMC. It's just Gray and I thought it was good to kind of these sort of terminology you come up with, they kind of give people an in on how you at least intend for these to be used. And I guess it just makes it feel like these are pieces for the game master. These are just like the players are a way for the player characters, I should say, are a way for the players to interact with the fiction of the game. Uh, Game master entities and game master characters are a way for the GM to not only sort of bounce off the players, but also kind of express themselves within the game. I know that sounds really kind of goofy and wordy for like you control the shopkeepers and the dragons, but I think it's important, so it's worth bringing up. Um, Specifically, adversary refers to a game master character um, that is either comes is sort of expected to come in conflict with the players, or sort of participate in conflicts and that sort of thing, um, with other with the player characters and that sort of thing. Drive the adventure along, or somehow be involved in that. As opposed to like um, the person on the street who gives you the who like lets you know that there's a weird cave outside town. They're not really heavily involved with the adventure itself, where the sort of creatures we're talking about and individuals we're talking about in this section are going to play a bigger part in those adventures. Um, the adversary I pulled up here is a favorite of mine called the Champa. And I kind of pulled this one up because one, it's got great art. Like, but again, everything in this book has great art because Gray is good at drawing. Um, but also, I feel like it kind of illustrates kind of how the monsters sort of play into the game and how their abilities sort of like suggest how they're to be used and that sort of thing by the GM. Let's go over the basic structure of an entity uh, first and foremost. So right here, obviously, we have the name of the monster. Um, that's the Champa. I think there's a pretty clear reason as to why it's called that. Um, as you can see here, it is nominated as a boss, and is a rank of 4. To explain this right here, the boss part right here, every adversary has a menace rating. Um, it's referred to as menace because it's fancy, but also because like it basically sort of suggests how much of a danger this category of creature represents to the player characters, the characters and stuff like that. So there are 4 different levels. There's Mook, which um, by the name, you can probably guess these are creatures or individuals who only maybe have 1 or 2 hearts. They are not meant to be serious threats. They're more like swarms. They're your kind of average, like guards or bandits and that kind of stuff. They are not on the same footing as a player character. A boss is on the same, is relatively on the same footing as a player character. Um, of the same rank. Funny Hat Chronomancer, the equivalent of a 4E D&D minion. Um, yeah, I guess that's probably a good way to go. Like it's a similar concept where I'd say it's not so much they don't have too many distinct rules from say a boss character. Like they don't interact differently with the rules, save for the fact that they're a little weaker, and there are some ways you can kind of like, similar to 4E minion, you can roll for them as a group when it comes to like certain resistances and stuff like that. So I think that's not a terrible comparison. Um, but yeah, anyway, a boss is more or less on the same footing as a player character of the same rank. Obviously, I say more or less because there's never going to be anything perfectly balanced. There are some that will probably similar to like just how if you have an adversary monster who's big and has giant teeth, he's clearly probably going to be more dangerous than an adversary monster who's designed to be more of like um, a nobleman who happens to be a little bit good with the sword and have good diplomatic abilities and that kind of stuff. So this is more of a loose guide, but it kind of works. That's kind of like the sort of basic level here. Um, there is, after boss, there is something referred to as a mega boss, and we'll be talking about something, we'll be making a mega boss actually sometime in this stream. So I'll get more into them later. But the important thing to note about that is mega bosses are intended to be a danger to an entire group of player characters. Usually the general consensus is about 4 player characters. So like again, it's a pretty loose guideline, but mega boss characters will have abilities that allow them to stave off or threaten large groups at once. There's also colossal creatures, which are another level of menace. Colossal creatures are huge. They require, they themselves are not only a monster, they are a map. And maybe someday I'll do a whole stream about them because they're a little more complex. But those are the 4 levels those are the 4 levels of menace. This guy here, this big old guy here, is just a boss, so we don't have to worry too much about those additional rules just yet. So first off, one thing I really love about the way Gray has laid things out here is you can see it's almost got like kind of an action figure-like quality with the little bars and stuff. This right here are sort of quick information. This is all really fast stuff that you'll need on the fly, like the combat values, its aptitudes. If you recall, these aptitudes match the aptitudes the player characters have. And then there'll be like some basic stuff here, like how what its type is. Our types are pretty loose. They're more meant to be evocative than like say mechanically. They're supposed to be more fictionally evocative than mechanically evocative. So don't worry too much about that. But the size is important, which will come up in its abilities, and its allegiance can be important. In this case, our Champa is unaligned. He doesn't have strong opinions one way or another. Well, no, all allegiance means is whether you have more light or dark magic. Since the Champa doesn't have any magic, they're unaligned. Before I forget, up here underneath the name, there's always a little quote and like a kind of brief introduction to the monster itself. This is kind of almost like the pitch for the creature or adversary. Um, I usually try to fit in a joke or a sort of a catchy line in this one massive muncher in this case. Um, and then there's a little like, more proper intro. A distant cousin of the bumpo, these omnivorous bovines are much less docile and armed with an enormous tusk-filled mouth, which is pretty clear by looking at it here. Also, again, before I forget, um, this is still our work in progress PDF, so if you see any errors, good job. You don't need to let me know. We know we're working them out as we speak. Um, anyway, in addition to this quick information here, each picture will have little like factoids here that these are not supposed to be detailed so much as kind of jog your memory when you're looking at this monster, or if you like want to get a quick look here. So we'll get into these more thoroughly. But for example, it shows you its Mighty Munch, which shows like it's the um, sort of bullet pointed list of what that ability entails. And we'll get to the gnaw and spit damage here in a minute. Um, and yeah, we got a cute little guy over here. So past all this quick information, we have these which are more of like the fiction stuff here. So we have the habitat, um, which is kind of speaks for itself. It's a place where you're going to encounter this kind of creature. Um, gear, which is things that it might have on its person. Um, how it communicates. This is a little more important when you're talking about a creature that can speak, obviously. Um, if it can speak, it'll have what languages, what languages it knows, or how it does so. Like for example, is it telepathy or something like that? In this case, the Champa isn't much of a conversationalist, so we're not going to see too much there. We have a sort of brief outline of tactics. This is mainly so that when you're looking at the adversary, I put these in here because I wanted people to know how I intended what I thought was an effective way to use these creatures. Kind of like also a peek into what I would do as the GM running them. Let's zoom in a bit more. Indicators. This is a bit we put in each adversary. These are signs that they are coming, and these are signs that they are coming or nearby or something like that. So in mainly this is for game masters who maybe want to put these monsters in a dungeon or have them an encounter with them on the road or something like that. And these indicators are things that can suggest to the players what's coming along. So, for example, big bites taken of the landscape, deep and wide footprints, and the sound of open mouth chewing and flatulence, which Gray added that mention of flatulence, but it cracks me up every time. These are things you would hear and see that would give you a hint that something like the Champa is coming. But also, even in the context of adventure, um, someone could see this and go, "Oh, there's going to be something with a big mouth coming up along the way. We should probably be careful." Um, Role playing notes are generally there just so you get an idea of, like, again, similar to the tactics. It's how this thing, kind of the demeanor, how it acts, how you'd want to role playing it. Obviously, a little more important when you're talking about adversaries that are intelligent or are sentient, sapients, I guess I should say. But it's still important with something like, say, the Champa. As you notice, they are really only interested in filling their bellies and won't be motivated by anger or retribution. So that's important to note. And then customization is just, we'll probably go more into this when I get into creating adversaries, but customization is basically like how you can kind of mess around with this creature to make it your own or make unique variances of that particular creature. So in this case, it notes that they can be used as pack beasts or mounts by creatures who favor strength and ferocity over speed. So for example, you wanted a cool, like, uh, a really fearsome bandit warlord, or like a sort of strange little merchant guy or something, and you wanted to have some color or danger to them, you might say your sort of big bandit guy rides around on a champa, which is pretty fearsome, I think. Uh, so yeah, that was kind of suggestion here. So anyway, um, after you get through all that information, we have the more like in-depth information here, the first thing to cover are abilities. And abilities are super important. Just like it was mentioned in the character creation stream, abilities are tied specific, like anything that a creature can do that's out of the ordinary or not, it wouldn't be expected of just a regular individual is listed as an ability. Um, so it covers a lot of ground. And in this case, for example, the first ability is Biggin. A champa is immense. And all this does is note that the champa is a large species. That's important just for the same reason, anybody is a large species. And it should be noted, we can go to it's notes the page you can find on here. Being a large species means it can carry more. It ups its strength, or I'm sorry, its might. Um, it makes it a little easier to hit. Um, and all that's already reflected in the creature's stats. But it's good to note here too um, that it is large. Now then, after we get past this really easy ability, we're going to scroll down to the Mighty Munch, which is probably the focus, the main ability of the Champa. And this kind of shows that ability can be a little more complex than normal. This is closer. This kind of ability here is closer to what you would see a calling might be able to grant its player character. A Champa's tusks strike as a mighty weapon, and mighty weapons basically do 2 hearts of damage instead of 1 when they hit. So this is basically just letting you know that when this thing bites you, it hurts a lot. It also, again, has the page here, page 153, if you want to go check out what a mighty weapon can do. But in addition, not only does this guy bite hard, they can also, after a successful attack, a champa can attempt to draw you into its mouth if you are medium-sized or smaller. So basically, it can't do this to other large creatures, obviously for a lot of obvious reasons, but it can sort of swallow you whole, as it were. But if that was all it could do, that wouldn't be very breaky. So it goes into more detail here. This requires a might contest. So basically, when it's trying to draw you into its mouth, a player character will be able to resist with its might. And a might contest is kind of a roll-off between two. Again, it was talked a bit about in the character creation scene, but basically both whenever there's a contest, both the involved parties roll against their aptitude, the corresponding aptitude, and whoever rolls better succeeds. If the Champa wins this might contest, the character is restrained, which is a status ailment, which basically means they can't move around a whole lot. Again, for obvious reasons, you're stuck in its mouth. And it notes here, you can attempt to escape at the beginning of each subsequent turn by winning a might contest. So all right, that's pretty basic stuff here. It also notes here that inanimate objects, such as boulders, can be sucked in the Champa's mouth without a contest. There's a reason it notes this right here. Because Champa can do one of 2 things when it has something in its mouth. It can either gnaw on it, which does a heart of damage, which is a good way to wear down a really powerful foe if it's fighting them. Or it can spit them out, which fires the unfortunate victim at a target up to 2 battlefield areas away. On a successful attack, you and the target take 1 heart of damage and are toppled. So basically, it sort of spits you out like you're a projectile, and you and a friend can end up sprawled on the ground, having taken some damage for it. This is one of my favorite monster abilities because Swallow Whole was one of the most effective abilities in D&D that I saw monsters have, and I personally think it's very funny when a character is used as a weapon against another character. So when I came up with this guy, I was like, what if we did both? And also I'm a big fan of the Kirby games, and this is Kirby's main method of attack, which is why I use that. So okay, that is its main method of fighting. So after we go through that, we got a blubbery hide. This also shows the kind of scope that abilities might have. In this case, it just notes the Champa skin is tough, and it gives it a defense rating, an additional heart, but it makes it slow. And this is basically, this allows this kind of thing is there to show that monsters that can't wear armor can still be tough, and how you can kind of give gear bonuses to creatures via abilities and that kind of stuff, which is why that's important. So okay, those are the Champa's abilities. Right here is yield. Yield is kind of like, generally this can be obvious stuff. Like for example, if this were an entry for say a mercenary or an evil wizard or something, it would list the stuff they are carrying around and what your characters can claim, or like the magic items they might have on their person. In the case of a bestial creature like the Champa, what it has here is stuff you can extract from the Champa. So if you've ever played Monster Hunter before, think like that, where when you defeat the monster, you can kind of like, if you have, in this case, the Butcher ability that a champion can extract parts from a monster, um, from a slain monster. Goodness, I should mention that. That would be kind of even a little too much. But anyway, in this case, the Champa's hide is really great. Can be used as a special form of light or medium armor, and also functions as an extreme weather outfit. Extreme weather outfit is basically, there are certain areas you can be traveling in that can be too hot or too cold. The extreme weather outfit, in this case cold, will protect you from those areas while traveling through those areas. You can also extract its teeth and use them as mighty weapons. And also it notes here how many character slots this take up. So basically how much it takes up in your inventory, and also how much money they're worth if you try to sell them. Well, if you were to try to sell them or try to use them to make other things. And this is because, again, we want to make it an option, something you can kind of play around with. Maybe your character wants to sell monster parts or make cool armor or that kind of stuff. That's why we have those there. Another thing, after the yield, we get to the mood table. A mood table is, what an icon. Anyway, the mood table is exactly what it sounds like. This was really these are in here specifically for if these come up as a random encounter, or if the game master throws them in there without an idea of how the encounter is supposed to go. So here you can roll on a d20 to figure out sort of how the creature is at this very moment. This is also nice because it shows that none of these creatures are kind of in like auto murder mode. Like there's plenty of times you'll come across a monster and they'll be sleeping or something, as opposed to not every creature is waiting around the bend for helpless player characters. So in this case, the Champa can be docile, which means it's sleeping. Disinterested, which means it's already eating. In this case, we tried to put a little color in here. So the Champa is busy making a meal out of a factotum's pack or a merchant's cart. So basically, it's eating valuable stuff, and the traveler whose stuff is eating might offer the PCs a reward for chasing it off. So right here is a built-in encounter, and then hangry, which means this one's a hungry Champa and will come right at the characters. Generally, mood tables are all going to be that. They're either going to be sort of relaxed or uninterested in the players, sort of neutral to the players, and hostile to the players. Actually, I would say a Snickers bar is a valid treasure in in Break. If you, depending on a realistic Snickers bar, a realistically statted out Snickers bar would just count as a treat. But if we were to have the mythical Snickers bar that we see in the commercials, that make everybody nicer when they eat a Snickers, that would also count as a hearty ration as well. I don't know if I'd say real Snickers count as that, but after the mood table, we have the reskin, and this is important, and we'll go over reskinning too when we get into making monsters and that sort of thing. Um, but basically, the reskin here, these are suggestions again, like the similar to customization. This is sort of tips, hints, and tips on directions you could take the monster um, to kind of make it your own. But isn't just customizing an original or an existing monster. It's making an entirely new creature out of the sort of structure the monster provides. So in this case, for example, if we remove the Champa's blubbery hide and provide it with supernatural leaping or might, it could create a wolf or bear-like beast. Um, so like if you wanted to make for example, if you wanted to make a kind of big bad wolf style creature from like a fairy tale style creature, you could take the Champa, keep its all its other abilities, but make it really fast and be able to jump really high instead of making it sort of big and slow and lumbering. Um, Giving the Champa the ability to move fast in the water will create a monstrous turtle or hippopotamus, which again, um, I liked adding this one here. I could even spray water at people and that kind of stuff with a powerful stream with Mighty Munch. And so, say you just kind of want to, the players are going to be on a river. They're going to be on a little boat. They're going to be really happy with their little boat, and you want to mess up their day because you're the game master, and that's fun to do. They could be attacked by a sort of Champa hippopotamus. But yeah, almost all the monsters in Break are broken down like this, obviously. Um, there are a handful of them with special circumstances, and they are generally different menace rules and that kind of stuff. And we'll probably get into that a bit. Um, but rather than look at more of the monsters, I want to now skip ahead and look at the rules for making your own and reskinning. So, um, first off, um, when creating, or we'll actually go up to creating adversaries in a second here. First, I want to show you this fun thing here. Um, this is kind of just a little section that we used to show like what you can do to customize adversaries. So, for example, we have this guy here, or here we are. Here with our Champa here. Remove the what I just mentioned. Remove the blubbery skin ability, and add an ability that grants supernatural leaping and upgrades speed to fast to make a snarl, which is this cool kind of big wolf guy, the Champa Walpopotamus. Thank you. That is a good name. Um, that's probably the official name of the here. Anyway, the snarl is a good example of like kind of I think would be um, something you'd put in like a forest or as a forest guardian or something like that. You could have a lot of fun with it. But anyway, generally we wanted to make it so that every monster could be sort of tweaked to um, your needs for any particular adventure. Reskinning is my main suggested way of um, sort of fleshing out adding custom stuff to your adventure because that way um, you don't have to worry too much about making too much stuff wholesale. And in the spirit of that, I do have a reskinned monster that I have created for the stream. And don't worry, we'll create one from scratch as well, so we'll cover these rules here. But I want to show an example of reskinning first. So, go to page 202. As you can see here, we have the Proud Hound Sellsword. This is a Mundi Mutt, which are sort of dog people, and this is an experienced mercenary, sort of like a fellow who's like a kind of very versatile adversary. As a sellsword, they could be working against the player characters. They could be someone they run into. Um, yes, the pommel is a bone. It was very funny when we were talking about the Proud Hound because I was explaining. Gray and I were talking about it, um, and we joked about. Um, I think it was Scottish Terriers, and Gray was like, "Can we give him a hat?" And I'm like, "Yes, please, please, definitely give him the hat." And sort of um, the swords. It mentions their pack swords, which are very important to them, and they get a little bone pommel as a result. Um, but yes. Um, so anyway, this is a pretty nice, solid rank 6 enemy. Um, rank 6 is pretty high up there, so this is a good. I like to use this as a good example of like a sort of mid-level. Like if you were watching an anime, this is the guy who would show up in the beginning and be really fearsome, and somewhere along the end of the first or the beginning of the second season, the main characters would sort of catch up with them. So I've picked this guy because if you note down here, all the way here at the reskinned, proudhounds can be reskinned to make other animalistic humanoids. Um, and specifically, uh, swap out canine. Swap out something for the the big eater quirk for pigmen porks. Now, porks are a Gray invention. He drew them for a couple of the pictures. They are sort of friendlier looking versions of pig-faced orcs you'd see in old versions of D&D. And I thought that was that name is too good. The porks is too good a name to not play around with. And since I talked about them in one of my earliest streams, and it turned out they had been removed from the book, I felt bad, and I decided I would reskin the Proud Hound into a pork, uh, into a pork adversary. So I present to everyone. As you can see, unfortunately, I do not have cool art for this because, unlike Gray, I am not a proficient artist. Um, oops, that's not what we want to look at. The I just have the text here, and we have the Swinehart Cavalier. Um, and I specifically did that because I didn't want. I just thought it would be fun. Like the sort of example porks that Gray had were like these sort of uh, rough and tumble bandit types. Draw support. One of these people in the chat, our good friend Gridshock. Go check out that game, Gridshock. It's very cool. Uh, draw support right now. This is Twitch. Do people draw on Twitch? Is that like a main thing? I thought people just played video games on it. So maybe I'll draw a pork sometime and post it. They do. All right. Well, you guys are gonna have to settle for me not drawing it because I don't know how. But anyway, instead of a Proudhound sellsword, we have a Swinehart Cavalier. And I did this because I would thought, wouldn't it be, since we already have an example, um, is there a significant GIF-like culture among these guys? Says Funny Hat Necromancer. So the Proudhounds, before we get into the pork here, the Proudhounds, there's two kinds of Mundy Mutts put in the main book. There are mange and Proudhounds. Mange are sort of like people are sort of Mundy Mutts who have broken off from greater Mundy Mutt society for whatever reason and are acting as bandits and stuff like that. And the Proudhounds are those who have struck out into the world to make money for their like little Mundy Mutt clan, and they're all like they're all bad puns like Puggins and Benords and stuff like that. Um, so I don't know if I'd say it's GIF-like culture, but it is. They do have a sort of thing where they're making money for a group of people that is like their like fellows and that kind of stuff. Um, I just think that's kind of a fun background thing for them. Anyway, back to this Swinehart Cavalier. Um, my dumb little quote here is absolutely piggish, old chum. And I thought it would be fun instead of for our first pork, our first official pork, to be a sort of gallant warrior type as opposed to like, I just thought that would be neat, like a sort of big guy knight um, character. So imagine if you would a very like a sort of like Muppet looking pig guy in big armor with like very fancy hair and stuff like that. Um, and I wrote a little introduction seeking fine food, good times, and high adventure. This hoggish knight travels across the outer world. Thanks to their love of a good scrap, they can end up in the employ of both the wicked and the benign. And most of their stats are the same as the Proudhound Sellsword, so their menace level is boss, their rank is 6. something I did do is, if you can notice here, their aptitudes are a little different. And the reason why the aptitudes are a little different is the Proudhound Sellsword has different traits. So if you recall from the characterization stream, um, most things have sort of standardized aptitudes, and then their traits modify them. In the case of adversaries, um, the the aptitudes are more standardized, but as a result, their traits can have basically they can have more traits than a um, player character does. Player characters have 2 positive traits and 1 negative. Um, Adversaries also have 2 positive and 1 negative, but they can add another positive trait if they also add another negative trait. So you'll see that's how you end up with a little more variance with their aptitudes, and kind of like gives the game master, when making them, a bit more leg room to sort of squish around if they want. So in this case, the Proudhound is rough. You get it? Because as a dog, anyway, is rough, stalwart, and aware. So the rough means it has a -1 deafness, but is stalwart, gives a +2 grift, and is aware as a +1 insight. This is because the Proudhound was supposed to represent a kind of a sort of like tough, rough and tumble, stoic mercenary type guy. Whereas I've decided our Swinehart Cavalier is a little more genteel, um, but and maybe a little less disciplined. So in his case, he is charmingly robust and blithe. So the charmingly robust is carrying a lot of weight here, because it gives a +1 grit due to his grand size, but also a +1 aura, because again, it's in a sort of charming, winning sort of way. But however, blithe, which basically means that he kind of skims over things, doesn't pay a lot of attention, has given him a -1 insight. The pork isn't pig-headed. You know, Breberg, pig-headed would have been a good trait to give to the pork. I didn't think of it, but don't worry, there's more puns coming up. So hopefully I make up for that failure. You know what? Actually, we're going to pretend. Look at that. He's pig-headed. I'm so clever. Anyway, as a result, funny enough, has a bit more like, while as strong as the Proudhound Sellsword, not quite as tough, but definitely more charming. Also, I should note, um, the the I should note here, so this makes some sense. When you're creating a monster, when you're creating an adversary, you dictate what the primary aptitudes and secondary aptitudes are. This is primary aptitudes are higher, and the secondary aptitudes are a little lower. It's basically a way to, like, if you want to make, like, sort of, you have to give and take a bit. So if you have a warrior one like this guy, having might and grit as a primary aptitude and like insight as a secondary makes sense. So in this case, it's just showing that the Swinehart, their might, grit, and aura are primary, which are higher, and their secondary aptitudes are deafness and insight. They care less about these things, they're lower. This is a little different. I customized this a little from the Proudhound Sellsword, who had might, grit, and insight as their primaries instead. Anyway, sorry, had to get in a little bit in the weeds here. For the most part, these are the same as the Proudhound Sellsword, so I did not have to do a lot of work here. I did change the name. Instead of a pack sword, the Pork Swinehart Cavalier has a pig sticker, which in this case is a Mighty Master combination weapon. So think like a kind of really well-made two-handed sword, or sort of, in this guy's case, I imagine it's more of a lance kind of thing. And also wearing heavy armor, because they're a cavalier, gotta armor up. The Proudhound Sellsword has an ability called Doggone Good Sense, which the Pork does not have because he's not a dog. Instead, I gave him the Goodly Gourmand ability, which this is actually a reskinned version of the Big Eater quirk. And basically, um, porks, uh, they like to eat, and if they take an action in combat to consume a day's worth of rations, this restores a lost heart in addition to other benefits the food may bestow. So basically, this guy can hunger down, chomp on something tasty, and get a heart back after losing it. Makes him a good tank. Um, the Proudhound Sellsword has an ability called Canine Leap. I have replaced it with the Pork Chop, which is they're both basically it's the same ability, but I'm just recontextualizing it. Um, the Pork Chop is a powerful uh, ability that is the art of the porkish, art of the advancing blow. They can jump high and they can hit really hard. To demonstrate, I have a GIF of the Pork Chop in action. As you can see, this is a very dangerous ability to be feared. So um, the pork. This is again though. I didn't do a whole lot of extra work here. I literally just renamed a Proudhound Sellsword ability, but I've also given it. All you have to do is give it just a different name and a little bit of a recontextualization, and you have a brand new thing essentially. This saves you a lot of work as a game master. Um, the Proudhound Sellsword also has an ability that lets them sort of um, bark and roar at somebody, and this usually leads them with the terrified ailment. Um, I thought that didn't really fit our Swinehart Cavalier very well, so instead I gave him Boorish Affront, which is basically um, they basically insult you. They take a turn, and instead of attacking or anything else, they berate and assault one target within the. Oops, I forgot to mention that. It should be instead of terrified, it afflicts them with the dispirited status ailment. And dispirited is a different ailment, which is basically your character being depressed and kind of feeling bad. Um, as a result, they usually this is kind of funny, I think, because normally dispirited is relegated to like really powerful magic effects and stuff that drain away your mirth and everything. But I like to think that this pork is so good at like just bullying you that you kind of sit on the ground. You have the little like black storm cloud over your head. You have to think about what he said. It's just so upsetting. Um, anyway, like the Proudhound ability though can only be used once per battle, so gotta be careful there. The rest of the stuff is just the things I noted before. Swineherd Cavaliers, they understand low speech as well as another language depending on their home region. Um, The tactics are basically the same as a Proudhound Sellsword as well. Um, the only new things I had to add was a yield that mentions that they have treats and hearty rations. Um, Instead of the Proudhound Sellsword, their yield mentions the pack sword um, and a oddity they carry around, a chew toy, tankard, or memento from home. So basically, like you can get different treasure and that kind of stuff. But that wasn't too much. I added a little role-playing note here. Um, how you can negotiate with you offering a treat during negotiation with a swinehart will give you a major bonus instead of the normal +2. Um, but this is all relatively minor stuff. Um, and the reason I show you this and I mention how minor it was is because, again, I'm talking about reskinning, how easy it is to make your own monster out of that stuff. And kind of also, too, as I mentioned, I pulled these abilities uh, from other places in the book. And the reason I mention that is abilities are pretty modular in Break. Um, they are designed in a way that you can shift them around and kind of use them to really create and customize your own thing. Another good example of this is there are drones, which are sort of robotic creations from a previous Aeon, and they have an ability that designates how they are mechanical and not affected by the same things that are organic are. And that ability, you could take that ability and place it on any number of other adversaries or even, other game master characters, and create a synthetic being instead of an organic one. And that's a good way to make, like, say I could very probably, if I wanted to do a little extra work here, I could take the Proudhound Sellsword and make it a sort of wandering robotic mercenary instead, with just a couple of swaps here and there. And so that's a good way to make monsters. It's something that I feel is a pretty fun feature of Break. We're obviously not the first game to do so, but I still think it's good to mention. Um, Funny Hat Necromancer again says, give the Proudhound Sellsword a gun, a cowboy hat, and a reskin stare down, and you have a no good dirty hound troll. All right, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. See, you're already in the spirit. Um, Sprat Trashcan asks, when I have a moment, I do have a moment. So far, the mood options have split into three options with uh, 25, 45, and 30% chance, respectively. Is that a general rule or coincidence? That's kind of right here a general rule. I figure just because the neutral would be the most common. But like, uh, some of it changes. There are some creatures, for example, that do not have a mood table because it specifically states that this creature should not be encountered randomly. There are ones where, like, um, the none of the moods are good, and instead, they might be distracted and that kind of stuff. But yeah, generally I try to keep the percentages like you noted there. The neutral being the most common, just because I figure that would be the most common, is a sort of wary neutral ones. And somebody, Colin Chapman says, puns are a welcome change of pace. Thank you. I appreciate that. But as another person in the stream noted earlier, I am drawing a lot of that from games like Dragon Quest and that kind of stuff. The video game, I should say, not the old tabletop RPG Dragon Quest, but the video game. But I also think it's because Break is not without its scary stuff. It's not without its stuff that's kind of messed up or macabre. But I feel like, there's room to be both scary and funny in the same book. So I try to do my best. And also, again, it's a dog man with a bone pommel sword. Like, I gotta have some puns in there. It's only right. So anyway, um, we've seen the Swinehart. We've seen how to reskin. Um, Before the night is done, I would like to show you how to make a monster from scratch. So before we get to it, I want to introduce this particular concept. Um, I think it's important whenever you're making an adversary of any kind, of any important kind. It's really important to kind of have the concept first, even if it's a very loose one. Like, so say, you might say your concept is, I want an evil wizard who does the call me queen laugh that you see in a lot of anime. That's a good enough one to make a whole character based off of, right? Or you might say, I just played Final Fantasy VII, and I would like to make a really intimidating guy with a big sword and a trench coat. That's also a good enough thing to run with. Um, so a couple of weeks ago, I asked people what their favorite 8 or 16-bit era gaming enemy was. And somebody mentioned a monster I hadn't thought about in a long time, which was Barrowberry from Breath of Fire 2, one of my favorite Super Nintendo JRPGs. Barrowberry is I love this design. He's such a weird looking, creepy monster. And uh, one of the things I like about him is the person that mentioned this enemy to me mentioned that this was a creature that shows up in the beginning of the game, freaks you out, and then you have to fight later on in the game. It's like a sort of penultimate final boss. It's um, the sort of almost probably probably harder than the final boss. So I actually really like this particular guy, and I wanted to sort of make him in break. If I were to actually put him in a break book, I would have to change the name, and I would probably, because um, the uh, the obviously I can't just put a Capcom owned character wholesale into the game. That would probably get me in a lot of trouble. Um, but I could use this as a concept. But because it's a stream and this is going to be not going to be official, um, I can go ahead and just call him Barrowberry for the sake here. So, um, Funny Hat Necromancer says, "Go Ultros or go home." Ultros would be a funny adversary to stat up, especially because not only is Ultros monstrous, he's also intelligent and has that sort of Team Rocket quality where he keeps showing up in the game as in varying levels of like sort of danger and that kind of stuff. But I wanted no one unfortunately mentioned Ultros, so I went with Barrowberry instead. Also, Colin Chapman. Oh, no worries. Just as a reminder, I will be posting this on YouTube. So if you have to duck out, or if you just wanted to get you know, hear more of it later, I will post it after I'm done on the stream. Okay. So anyway, let's go ahead and look at I have here, Barrowberry. I have my sort of concepts for its abilities and down. I should put down Barrowberry as his name. You do not have to actually make this organize a list. You could write it down on a handwritten. Um, you could write it in handwritten notes or that kind of stuff. I just have a document because I, unsurprisingly, come up with a lot of monsters for break, so it's useful to have a template. Normally, I would be fancy with his purpose. He's very scary. We're going to go ahead, and because I don't want to bore you all, we're going to put the introduction as TBD. Imagine I wrote something very flowery about how he's a fierce divine sentinel. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the actual rules for. Oh, we got a peek at Skelizabeth over here, the Skella Monarch. But I don't want to show off too much here. Let's go ahead and adversary creation. So, creating adversaries is important enough that it has its own section in the book, which we're looking at right now. Let's go ahead. Start. We have down here a breakdown of the list. Create a primary concept for your adversary. This is what I was just talking about. Basically, your concept is going to be the sort of basic thing you want to do, and it's going to be guided you throughout the process. List any useful quick facts about your adversary that will help you use them during play. So similar to the concept, once you have them, you can talk about like the quick facts were the stuff that were like those very simple breakdowns, like we saw in the Champa and the Proudhounds breakdown, like this is what their powers do and that kind of stuff. And that's again shorthand so that you have something quick to reference when you're using this in play. Choose a menace and rank to determine the level of threat to your adversary poses to your PCs. So that was what I mentioned before. With the top there, we'll go into that more detail. But that was the Mook bosses, that kind of stuff. Aptitudes and traits that fit with your adversary's concept, which we'll get to. Calculate your adversary's combat values. Decide on the adversary's yield. Create a mood table, and choose or create abilities to represent your adversary's mental, physical, and magical powers. So, right here we have the adversary concept. Again, I already talked about this, so I'm not going to too long here, but the theme is the main thing I was discussing. But also, as noted here, it is very important to think about what would make an encounter with your adversary interesting or challenging to the PCs. One of the reasons I note this is because I think it becomes a little too easy to kind of come up with adversaries that are like, all right, I just need something that they need something to fight, so it's just a fight guy. You want to come up with something fun about them, or even just like go through like, the adversaries that exist are like if you watched a show that you had a villain you thought was pretty cool. Think about how they made that particular enemy interesting to fight and that kind of stuff. We note here, is it elusive or immune to certain attacks? Does it have a significant tactile advantage in its lair? Does it have devastating melee attacks? Da, da, da. A good example of this, for example, um, Medusa in Greek myth specifically has her petrification ability, which makes her a little more interesting um, for of an opponent because she can turn you into stone with a look. Um, though poor Medusa just kind of protecting her house from guy breaking and entering, but I don't want to get into that. But anyway, that's a good example of a key challenge right there. The quick facts as noted here. Um, these are well, let's go ahead and see. So we're going to say uh, note here theme. He's a big scary boss guy. He can hit the whole party so I should note this. Borrowberry is a difficult boss to fight in Breath of Fire 2 for a couple of reasons. He has a lot of hit points, obviously, which is the main reason anybody's difficult to fight in a JRPG. But also, he has attacks that hit the entire party at once. Um, I'm going to say multiple because it might be a little hard to say everybody at once. Hit multiple enemies at once. And also has a deadly counterattack. Also to note, Borrowberry in the game has a high counterattack rate, which meant that when you attacked him, he would then hit you back really hard. Obviously, these are both pretty easy things to do and break. I'm gonna say that's a pretty simple theme, but I think it works for what we're doing here. And we're gonna go key encounter. Borrowberry is guarding the entrance to an important adventure site. And you know what? We're going to name the important adventure site. We're going to call it the Temple of the Poisoned God. See, okay, there. I don't know what that is yet, but it's a cool title. So we can say that that's the key encounter. And this is fun because we have a place where Borrowberry lives. Okay, so let's get back to here. We'll get to the quick facts later. I want to move ahead to the stuff here. Actually, no, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't go here. So let's say here, habitat. Well, you know what? We already talked about the habitat. Temple of the Poisoned God. We're going to say the Temple of the Poisoned God is located off the coast of the Galvanus, the main island of the Galvanus archipelago. Basically, that way we know, that gives us some context there. He's hanging around there. Let's see, habitat, tactics, and communication. So we're going to say Borrowberry does talk to you in the game. So we're going to say Borrowberry knows low speech. And since I've already designated that he's an ancient sort of divine guardian, we're going to say he also knows bright speech. Basically, the language that devas and other light aligned creatures know. And we're going to say We haven't narrowed down exactly, but I'm going to say Borrowberry's tactics. Hits the whole party at once to weaken them, draws them, or I should say, never mind. Let's reverse that. Weakens the strongest members of a party with his counterattack, uses area attacks to finish them off. And there we go. Now I have something sort of advising me along the way as I create this monster. So anyway, now that we're done there, we can get to the menace. Um, Adversaries can be one of 4 types of menace, which sets their rank and will impact what abilities they can access. As I noted way back in the beginning stream, these come in 4 uh, sort of 4 categories. I'll go over them again just here. Mooks or basic folks are always rank 0. Bosses range from rank 1 to 10. Mega bosses range from rank 5 to 15 and have a legendary ability and an attack bonus equal to their rank rather than the standard value from the progression table, or an edge on rolls related to a particular aptitude. So we'll get down to there in a second here, but basically usually creatures have a standard attack value based on their creature rank. A sort of mega boss can decide to have an attack bonus equal to their rank. So basically the same as a warrior type character. And that's good for if your adversary is going to be like a fighty type person. But if you instead want to make them focus on other things or even be like a spellcaster or something like that, you might choose an edge on the edge on rolls related to a particular aptitude, which would then you choose the aptitude most tied to their abilities to give them the advantage on that. And so, for example, if I was making a sorcerer or a witch, I would probably make their aura or insight have edges on the rolls. As a review from the very, very first stream, and an edge is similar to advantage in other games, where you get to re-roll, you get to roll a dice twice and pick the value that benefits you more. We also have Colossi, ranged from rank 5 to 15. They have the Colossal ability, which we note elsewhere, and comes with 1 sweep and 1 repulse attack. These are all, again, I noticed, I mentioned before, Colossi are sort of really enormous creatures that require special circumstances to do battle with. Usually you're climbing all around them and striking at specific points in their body. They are a totally different beast, for lack of a better term, and so I won't be going over them too much on this stream, but they're worth mentioning. So anyway, let's decide the menace for Borrowberry here. He's definitely a mega boss. He's a huge guy. He's meant to fight a whole group at once. You know, like, this is a fearsome entity that's not supposed to be taken on by yourself. Even though in the game you can try to take him on by yourself. But anyway, so we're saying he's a mega boss, and because he is the guardian of, we're going to make him a powerful one. We're going to say rank 8. So he's a pretty big one. That's considering most characters in Break sort of max out at rank 10. Him being rank 8 means that he's a pretty high danger encounter. We don't know the allegiance yet. We'll know that when we're finished the abilities. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. As you can notice here, the exact rank you select determines your adversary's overall strength and potency. Choose a rank suggested by your adversary's menace. Most living things are rank 0 to 2. And we kind of broke it down like this, so it made, when you're making things, you could easily kind of go, okay, I want to make, a sort of guy who menaces the locals of a particular province or whatever. That would probably be a rank 3 or 4. Rank 5 is really high up there. It's beyond the reach of most mortals. these guys usually have a rep. Entities of rank 11 and higher are truly legendary, powerful mortals, divine beings from beyond the heaven seal, or landscape-destroying colossi. So where Borrowberry is rank 8, which would put him in this category, I imagine he's guarding a temple where something that has like rank 11 or higher in there. So we're building out. The Poisoned God, perhaps, is rank 11 or higher. The I do like this my little GM hint here. If you're worried about creating an under or overpowered monster, run a few quick test fights with your players' PCs to see how it turns out. Obviously, I think this is like when we say this, it's like usually like you would know your players' stats. You could kind of affect kind of sort of use that to try and guess and see how well it would go. But it is also funny to imagine having people when you're bored one day, maybe like you're waiting for the other players to show up, or like you just had lunch somewhere and you're like, you want to run some test runs against this new guy. You could have like a sort of almost fighting game level training thing with it. Though I don't know how practical that is for everybody. So um, anyway, now that we've decided the rank, we can go ahead to aptitudes and traits. Down here, we have the handy dandy adversary table. And this shows the menace, like sort of like where you can fall depending on your menace rating. Rank, and then you can look and see what the attack is, how many hearts they have, what their primary and secondary aptitudes, how high their primary and secondary aptitudes are, how many abilities they have, and if they have access to advanced or legendary abilities. Notice these are color-coded, the orange being the boss, and the purple being Colossus or Mega Bosses. As you know, the Colossus and Mega Bosses get to have legendary abilities, which down here are noted text-wise as well. Advanced abilities are only available at rank 5 or higher. Legendary abilities are only available to Colossi or Mega Bosses. To break that down, similar to how player characters have standard abilities and advanced elective abilities in their calling, we broke down adversary abilities as standard and advanced as well. And they're much looser in a way. Obviously, there's no, as of yet, there's no giant pool of abilities that monsters are, a standardized pool of abilities that monsters are pulling from. I think a fun project would be someday to release a sort of like document with some suggested monster abilities and stuff in it. But that would be a supplement. That's not in the main book. This one just has kind of, that's kind of fulfilled by the example adversaries already in the book. But basically there are certain parameters, and we'll look into those, that define it as a standard or advanced ability. And it's generally how potent it is. Also included, this is a range. Obviously not every creature is going to have the same amount of abilities. But this is kind of like, hey, this is a good measure of how many abilities an adversary should have based on its rank. But also the caveat is don't give it so many abilities it ends up being unwieldy for you, and that's kind of a self-judgment, that kind of thing. But so, for example, here, we can look at Borrowberry. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. There we go. Yep. This makes me feel like I'm at work again. I do lots of tiny windows at work as well. But anyway, so let me see if I can find here. Commodifiers ranks. I'm trying to remember. So okay, here we are. I'm going to say Borrowberry, his primary aptitudes, which would mean if you recall, his aptitudes that are the highest, are going to be might, because he's strong, grit, because he's tough, and aura, because he's such a fearsome villain with a lot of presence. And that means his secondary aptitude are insight, or deafness, I should say, and insight. which means he's not terribly delicate or nimble and not terribly observant. But he doesn't need to be. He's a gigantic, terrible monster. So, as noted, he has 2 positive traits and 2 negative. I'm going to say positive trait. And when I say positive, I should say it benefits him, not necessarily that it is actually a positive trait. In this case, we're going to say, maybe we'll say, normally I would come up with fancy words for this, but I'm going to just wing it here. Real strong, very spooky, not graceful, which translates into +1 light, +1 aura, -1 deafness. Now, notice I said real strong, very spooky, and not good. Let's say, we're going to say extremely not graceful. So the reason why I put these here is so this is the sort of standard 2 positive, 1 negative. But I'm going to say that this ups, if you recall, adversaries can have more more positive traits if they take more negative or more potent negative traits. So I'm going to say he gets +2 might from that, from real strong, +2 for aura from very spooky. But that means I have to add 2 more negative traits. So he has -3 deafness from extremely not graceful. And that means his stats are going to be much more effective than they would be before. So since he is rank 10, or sorry, since he's rank 8, we're going to put down that he has, his primary ones all have 11. So this one and this one. Made it really easy for myself here. And these are 10. However, now we're going to add in his traits. So his might becomes 13. I can math. His aura becomes 13, but his deafness sinks way down to 7, which means he's definitely not making any of those deafness checks anytime soon. And these will probably be further modified later on, but it's good just to know we can note him here for now. Excuse me, getting a little drink. So, okay. At rank 8, he has 5 hearts, which is pretty tough. We should note here, too, his speed is normal because everybody's speed is normal. Right now, we don't have any extras for his defense rating, so we're not going to worry about that. However, I do want to note here, as a mega boss, mega boss, Baru Berry has attack value equal to his rank. And this is because Barberry is going to be a very combat heavy creature. So I figure rather than, between the 2 I mentioned you can pick as with a mega boss, I thought an higher attack rating is going to be the more useful for him. So normally a rank 8 creature has an attack rating of 6. Because as a mega boss he's got that bonus, he's going to have one of +8. So he's going to have a much easier time hitting player characters than most similarly ranked individuals. Okay, and I would like to note here, I've already written down the general gist of his abilities. So we'll get to those here. Something to note, I want to point up here, I should note, I already said there that start with a defense rating of 10. Okay. Let's get to abilities because that's the big one. So we're going to go into here, but basically abilities fall into a couple different kind of categories. One that provides a bonus or edge on a specific type of roll. Something that's a physical trait, such as their size, supernatural senses, special movements, or something like that. A special attack, which is exactly what it sounds like, or some kind of support, which is, that sort of thing that to kind of help like boost other monsters and that kind of stuff. Skill, which is this is run right here is not going to be much for Borrowberry, but say for example I was creating a monstrous blacksmith or a sort of little impish guide for a dungeon, this would be more useful. And then of course there's stuff that's just magic, like invisibility, flying, or other weirdo stuff that wizards and witches and stuff can do. Barberry is going to have mostly physical traits and special attack stuff, just by the nature of his very, of his weird spiky body. We note here, if an ability draws on dark or bright mana, it will affect your adversary's allegiance just like it would a PC. When assigning an allegiance, use the following guidelines. And basically, I broke it down here. Bright aligned stuff, they're forceful, constructive, or straightforward. Invokes the elemental forces of fire or wind, versus dark abilities tend to be sharp, soothing, or deceptive, and invoke the elemental forces of water or shadow. Obviously, these don't cover everything, and they're not super strict rules. So, for example, if you want to make an ability that summons a bolt of darkness you throw at people as a direct attack, that's still a dark ability. But this is just kind of like there to be evocative or that kind of stuff. And I just realized I'm just saying exactly what this little GM guy is saying already. I've already noted that he knows bright tongue or bright speech, and that's because I think he's going to be mostly light aligned abilities. Something to note here, every magic ability they have will add allegiance points. Basic and advanced adversary abilities will add 1 allegiance point. Legendary abilities will add 2. That's really only important. There are certain abilities that players can get and other adversaries can get, and certain abilities that items and other relics might have that affect things based on their allegiance points. So it is important to track the allegiance points of even these sort of adversaries. So let's see here. Just kind of go over these pretty quickly. And this is what I noted earlier. Prior to modification, an adversary's mental and physical performance is comparable to an average human adult. Abilities are applied when a deviance from this baseline is desired. So basic abilities are like the standards kind of abilities. They do this kind of thing. Mimic a normal tool or weapon. So for example, the Champa's ability to bite as a mighty weapon is a basic ability because it's just mimicking a sort of mundane tool. Granting a crafting discipline or the ability to act as a guide. These are special abilities that are like that normal people can learn. Providing specialized movements such as climbing or swimming. Dealing special damage. So for example, if an attack just deals fire damage, doesn't deal any extra damage, it doesn't make an explosion, it just deals fire damage instead of normal damage. That would also be a basic ability. Are inflicting a hindering or non-lethal ailment. So there's a lot of status ailments in Break that are not like lethal or threatening. They're kind of more debilitating. Like you can get turned into kind of a goo version of yourself, and while that can be dangerous depending on the situation, in and of itself isn't particularly harmful. So that would be a basic ability. Advanced abilities have a little more stricter guidelines. And so, for example, doing up to 3 hearts of damage to an individual target is 1. Usually, normal attacks will only do 1 or 2 hearts of damage. So that's why that's noted. Attacks that affect the occupants of an entire battlefield area. Having an edge on common rolls. So when we say common rolls, like having an edge on all aptitude contests or on a particular aptitudes contest or checks would count as an advanced ability because that covers a lot of rolls versus getting a bonus or an edge on very specific rolls would probably still be a basic one. Granting a supernatural ability, like in this case, supernatural leaping or supernatural might, increasing the adversary's speed rating, or providing them with flight or other form of special movement, disabling other certain abilities or harmful effects, or inflicting a deadly or permanent ailment. So if I mentioned that goo ailment thing, that's basic unless that goo thing would be permanent as a result, which would bump it up to being an advanced ability. Mega bosses and Colossus have legendary abilities, and these enable them to take on a group of PCs on their own. Legendary abilities include enabling a retaliatory strike against anyone who misses an attack. Please remember I mentioned Barberry's counterattack ability. Causing a heart of damage or inflicting an ailment on individuals located in the same battlefield area as them, which is, again, is kind of a passive ability to do harm. Nullifying magical abilities, restoring a lost heart each turn, so like regeneration, that kind of stuff. Providing immunity to certain kinds of attacks would also be legendary. And so basically legendary abilities, so basic abilities are stuff you'd see on almost everything. Advanced abilities are scary stuff you'd see on particularly fearsome enemies and that kind of stuff. And legendary abilities are stuff that makes the whole party basically kind of have to deal with something. Barberry is going to have at least one of these as a mega boss, so it's important to note. Other thing when mentioning abilities is we have things in ability limits. If an ability is particularly potent or useful, basically you're going to want to put a limit on it to keep it from being like overly dominating. We mention if an ability only provides a minor perk, such as one that could be replicated by a piece of gear worth less than 25 coins, it does not need a limitation. But then also we go in here, minor limits versus major limits. Basically, you'd want to put minor limits on abilities that are significantly enhanced versions of normal actions. So like, an attack that does, that creates a status ailment is basically an attack with a little bonus. You could put a minor limit on that. So for example, the ability can be resisted by a successful check from the target. The ability can be attempted until the adversary fails the required roll or when it succeeds. The effect only lasts until the adversary uses the ability again, or you can only use it once during the same fight, and any subsequent use will result in losing a heart or risk contracting a detrimental ailment. So basically, these are minor limits you can throw on abilities that you kind of want to curb a bit, versus major limits. These are on big abilities that you don't want a guy spamming. A really good example of this is in Dungeons and Dragons. Excuse me, Dungeons and Dragons. Dragon's breath weapon can only be used a certain amount of times or has to recharge and that kind of stuff. And this is obviously to create kind of like urgency, but also because you don't want him just blowing his breath weapon every turn and just vaporizing a group of characters. So similarly, if you have an ability like that can harm an entire party, inflict a permanent negative effect, and that kind of stuff, you want to do a major ability. And this includes stuff as the ability can only be used once every 24 hours. The ability can be resisted via a contest. Contest versus a check. So a check is, you having a check versus a contest is important. A check means a player just rolls against their aptitude, right? So that means the stronger the player, the more likely ability is just not going to affect them. The contest is important for stronger monsters because that means it's the difficulty of avoiding it scales with the monster itself. So it's more difficult to resist abilities from a stronger monster, even if you yourself are a stronger character. So that's why we note the contest here for major limits instead. There's also other ones. The ability may only be ever used once against an individual. The successful use of the ability causes damage to the adversary or inflicts them with a temporary ailment. And the ability takes a round to charge, allowing the PCs to take evasive action. Basically, again, all these things to give people kind of a fighting chance against a very particularly powerful ability. We get here, down here, note the species and calling abilities give you a better idea of how you could use ability limits. You could give basic abilities higher levels of potency if you apply a severe ability limit. So basically, say I want to make a relatively weak wizard with a particularly powerful blast that may be, but I'll say said wizard, if he fires off this powerful blast that could really hurt characters, since he's not that strong, it might knock him out for a round or may even take away his magic for a couple of rounds or something like that. It's a way to kind of give you more legroom when it comes to designing abilities and that kind of stuff. And I know I'm going over this stuff pretty quickly. This is obviously something you'd want to look over more thoroughly if you were ever doing it yourself, but I'm just trying to give a basic outline of how this stuff goes here. So while we're here, I also want to note before we get to making Borrowberry's abilities, the massive species, because that's what Borrowberry is going to be, because he's a big guy. He's not quite a colossal guy. He's not going to need, you don't need your Omni maneuver gear to take on Borrowberry, but he's still pretty big. So I want to note here, that increases their might, makes their defense rating worse because they're harder to miss. Something to note about massive species, their might is relative to species of the same size. They always win might contests against smaller foes unless their opponents possess supernatural might. So that means even though Borrowberry, if we note here, even though Borrowberry has a might of 13, say you're playing a champion and your champion has a might of 14 because they're a pretty high ranking champion and you have a positive trait that bumps up your might. Unless your champion also has supernatural might, he's still going to lose an arm wrestling match against Borrowberry, since Borrowberry is massive, which we should go into there in a second there. Also to note with massive species, they might suffer the cramped area condition when in spaces. So if they crawl into a hallway or something, they might have the cramped area condition, which is a battlefield condition. Makes it harder for them to move. Massive species have some special attacks we'll have to note, but they obviously can't wear things designed for smaller species. So since we just talked about that, I'm going to put down here, Divide Behemoth, Borrowberry is massive, which I'll then note here. He has 15 might. So he's real strong. However, whatever his defense rating is going to be, it's going to be -2. Does extreme size count for number of creature abilities? Well, I would say it can. Like it can, because again, it makes the creature more potent in some ways. It gives them a host of abilities and stuff. So massive does. That said, small and large sizes come with both drawbacks and come with drawbacks that I think even things out. So I wouldn't count small or large against the number of abilities, but I would count massive size as one. So again, that's really kind of a your mileage may vary kind of thing, because it also does make the creature a little more complex one way or another. We want to note that Borrowberry can also sweep, as an arc weapon, strike as a mighty weapon. So basically this means he can either swipe with, we're going to say this means that he has big claws that he can swing about, or crush with. In case you missed earlier streams or your crush, thanks Google. An arc weapon means it strikes two people in the same area, like basically being swung in a big arc. And a mighty weapon, again, does extra damage. So basically, he can go for a sort of wide swing that hits multiple people, or he can smash one guy if he hates that guy in particular. I'm also going to say, though, since this is advanced, and as part of that, Barberry's armored body has a natural defense of 16, like heavy armor. So that's emulating a piece of gear. This is reduced to 14 due to massive size. Now, I know that if you're working on this on your own, you're probably not going to have to take notes like that, but I'm writing this out to show you my work and my process, that kind of stuff here. So as a result, we can also put down Barberry's defense rating. 14. Now, I would also, if I were writing this for a break supplement, I would include some flavor text here or some, like, some notation here as to why, maybe talk about how big and imposing and, like Barberry is, how his skin is like iron and that kind of stuff. But because we're just if I were just making this is like a boss for my personal game, I wouldn't have to make those notes because I already know it. So I'm not going to put them here for right now. So let's say here, I'm going to call up here, using what we've read, I'm going to make these abilities from scratch for the most part. I will note when I am not. But I've already put down the kind of abilities I want Barberry to have. So something here, fearsome aura. As noted, in the video game, Barberry is encountered when the main character is a child, and so is a very scary encounter and a boss fight the kid can't win. So as the person who brought Barberry up, they actually felt like for a second that they had done something wrong when they were playing the game, that they had hit like a bad ending or something. And that's how kind of creepy this guy was. For a 16-bit era video game, that's pretty intense. As a result, I like the idea that Barberry, mechanically in Break, can cause the terrified ailment, which basically represents a character being frightened out of their wits of a particular monster. The terrified element, I won't go into too much detail because it's in the book. Well, you know what, actually, we can look at it. I realize we can look at it because Gray drew some fun pictures of the status ailment, so we can look at one of them. Ooh, we're going quickly here. I wish I had remembered here the... So wait here. Oh, I skipped it. Good job, me. Well, you guys are getting some very swift look at the art here. Oh, wait, before we go here, I want to show off. This is not our Swinehart Cavalier, but this is a pork, so check out that guy. So, okay. As noted here, dispirited, fatigued, terrified. As a big, brave adventure, huh? The fearsome growl of a proud heart, the Galrave's haunting laugh can reduce the bravest soul into a quivering wreck. And as you can note here, people who are terrified have a snag on checks with and attacks that involve interacting with the source of their terror. Companions or game master characters are when they're terrified, they just run. They just get the heck out of dodge. Whereas this is important to note because your players might have, your characters might have followers and stuff like that along for the ride. So it makes sense that you'd want to see what happens if they get scared too. So anyway, encountering Baruberry may inflict I'm going to say, okay, incurs an aura contest versus the target's grit. If the target fails, they are afflicted with the terrified status ailment. And since this is a pretty powerful ability, I'm going to give it a special limitation. This ability does not work against individuals who are equal to or it's equal to Baruberry's rank or higher. And this also, I think, thematically fits. A creature or character who is rank 10 or high, or rank 9 or 10, they're going to see scarier things than Baruberry, and they're not going to be able to be supernaturally afflicted by the terror there. This also kind of fits with the theme I was talking about, because again, when he spooks you in Breath of Fire 2, it's when you're a little kid. It's when you're small and you're not strong. When you face him later on, your character is much stronger and has a bunch of abilities to face it. So that said, this does mean that this ability is more thematic in purpose. I would say this becomes useful because if you put Baruberry as the guardian of an adventure site, it's kind of a warning to people coming at it that they need to be a certain level of power before they want to try and break into this place, right? It's sort of like instead of going, a tree blocks your path, there's a spooky monster that you can attempt to beat at lower ranks if you want to. But this is kind of a soft block kind of thing, which I prefer. Anyway, still, that said, the players might face him when they're rank 7 instead, so that might still be important. Okay. So as I noted before, he should have a legendary ability. I've written this one as the Retributive Claw. And as noted, one of the example legendary abilities is the ability to attack anybody who misses them. I'm going to reverse it for a special for Baruberry. Baruberry may attack any individual who see this level of as you can see my typing. This is probably why I have to end up going back over things so many times. May attack any individual who successfully strikes him in melee. And again, this is a pretty simple ability, but it's pretty rough. I think it might encourage players to kind of find some way to attack Baruberry with ranged attacks, or only have people with heavy armor and that kind of stuff doing it. This also means though that he's going to have a lot more attacks than most monsters do. So I'm going to note here, this may be, as noted before, I'm just going to note here, a sweep or a strike. So this can also be nice too because since he already can do sweep and strike attacks due to his massive size, if somebody attacks him and like two people attack him in melee, he could do an arc attack both times, or just might attack against one or the other and that kind of stuff. Gives him some options. All right, so Borrowberry also has in the game Flame and Ice Breath as attacks. These could be separate abilities if you really wanted to, but I think they're close enough in effect that we can make them one ability. And I'm going to say that this is a ranged attack that hits an area as another of the advanced abilities. So we'll say Borrowberry may unleash an attack that hits an area, which is an area on the battlefield, which can hit multiple people, up to all right, I'm gonna rewrite this in a way. I'm gonna say unleash an attack. I'm gonna say all right. We'll get this. I'll get this. Barberry may spew a breath weapon. Haha, there we go. On an area or on a target up to 2 areas away. So this means 2 areas is important because that's about as far as like a bow can do in break as well. So this is a fairly good range attack. This attack hits the entire area and does 2 hearts of damage to I'm going to say here that this breath weapon is with an attack roll. And I'm just putting this here to note that he's got to roll an attack roll. And it would compare it to the defense of anybody in that area. So, okay, that's pretty good. So I want to give that a limitation here. Oh, wait, this is breath weapon. This breath weapon may do flame or frost damage as Borrowberry wishes. So okay, he can basically decide to do a special kind of damage. This is usually just for flavor, but certain characters and things are hurt or not hurt by certain kinds of damage, so it's good to note. Sack hits the entire area and does heroes damage to anyone successfully hit. And then we want to slap a good limitation on this. So once used, Borrowberry cannot use this ability for 2 more turns. So similar to the Dragon's Breath I mentioned, he can only use this basically every 3rd turn. And this is to keep him from just, unloading it every single round. You want to keep it interesting. I should also note here, since this is a legendary thing, these attacks are in addition to any strikes or to any actions takes in the round. So okay, I'm putting this, I should note here before I move on, this is here to make sure that you note that this legendary ability gives him a way to attack more than once in a round if this condition is met. Normally everything only has 1 action per round. So okay, so let me see, make sure this looks good. spew a breath weapon with an attack roll on a target up to let's see what's damage. Breath weapon may do flame frost, Barbary wishes. Can I use his ability for 2 more turns? Okay, so he's got a big boom attack here. Also to note, in the game, Barbary also has a lightning blast attack, which I don't think it really explains very well, but he just shoots lightning and it does a lot of damage. So we're going to say that Barbary, I just like saying his name, Barbary may target an individual with up to 2 areas. I'm going to say 3 areas. Let's make it really far away with a burst of divine lightning. That's spooky, right? This requires an attack roll. Does 3 hearts of damage on a hit. So okay, that's a really powerful ability. It hits far away, it does a lot of damage. So I'm going to hit it with another big limitation. And if you recall, one of the limitations is it can only be used once every 24 hours. And we're going to say that's what this lightning blast only does. This ability may only be used once every 24 hours. Now, normally, to be entirely honest with you, with a monster, being able to only use once every 24 hours probably means it's only ever going to come up once a session anyway. That said, Barbary is the kind of, or once per encounter, I should say. Barbary is the kind of encounter that I can see players sort of pulling back from and coming at him with a better plan in the same day. So it would be important to note whether he used this ability or not. So there we've got his kind of basic combat stuff here. He can shoot lightning. He can breathe frost and flame. He slices you up for bothering him. He's really scary. And as I noted here, these 3 abilities are magical because these are not normal things that he can, the fact that he's huge and the fact that he hits you when you hit him are both in spite of the fact that that's pretty monstrous, that's mundane for him. That's just stuff that's built into who he is. These are magical abilities. They draw forth magic, so I've noted them as being magic. And they are light aligned, as you noted here. As a result, this bumps up his allegiance to 3. Bright aligned. So this means if, for example, you had an ability that did extra damage to a bright aligned creature, it would hurt Barbary more than normal. Or if you had an ability that, or if you had an item that perhaps was attuned to bright aligned creatures and refused to act against them, it wouldn't work against Barbary either. So that's why this is important to note. If you're just a kind of fighter guy with a regular sword, you're probably not going to care one way or another, though. But yeah, there we go. We have the basics here. These nice abilities. We have a good idea of how it goes. If we remember, did I write the tactics? I'm jumping around. Yeah, weaken the strongest members of party off with his counterattacks. I'm going to have to change this because it actually, I wrote it down, but now that I look at it, we're going to say weakens with breath weapon and retributive strikes, uses lightning. How come I cannot? I just going to pretend. Please, everyone, pretend I can spell lightning. Uses lightning attack to finish off particularly troublesome opponents. So there we go. As a GM, this would be a pretty
good way to look at this monster. Now, would Borrowberry have... Now, the rest of the stuff would be kind of dependent on your game. I'm going to say Borrowberry's yield would be a frost flame gland. We'll say that the frost flame gland could be used to create frost flame weapons or imbue items with this quality. Now, I'm not going to do this in this stream because it's kind of out of scope for it. But I think it's fun to imagine that, you're going to have, this is something you probably, if you were making your own custom monster, this is probably something you would only have to put in there if you had a group that looked for this kind of stuff. I do, so I almost always put it in there. But basically, I'm putting this note here, and if I were making this monster for an adventure, I'd go back and sort of expand on this. To note, there are materials and additives that are important during crafting. They allow you to sort of make crazy stuff out of them, and there are some pretty fun rules involving making your own stuff and pulling stuff out of monsters and that kind of stuff. And that's why this yield section is important. As stated before, this stuff is mostly fictional stuff. How you'd want to do indicators, something like frozen. As noted, indicators are things you'd want to be able to sort of warn players about what this monster can do or that it's around. So in this case, bodies that have been charred or frozen solid, a low grumbling sound, 2 glowing eyes in the distance. And this is, again, just stuff that might tip off the character something dangerous is nearby. Role-playing notes, I would say Borrowberry is ruthless, but not overly cruel. Has no interest in chasing those retreating and will parlay to an extent. As I said, I'm just noting that for again, this is not something you'd always have to put down, especially if you're making your own custom monster, but it is good to have these notes. Now, I'm not going to put down customization here because that would really, we could talk about it a bit though. I think it's important. Similarly, like I would say you could use Borrowberry's template. Oh, you know what, actually, why not? Why not put this down? You use to represent a type of temple guardian rather than a singular entity. Other versions may do variant types of damage or inflict status ailments with their breath weapon or lightning attack. And that's, again, just, kind of a note what you could do. You know what? Even in your own custom monsters, putting that down might give you ideas for later. Like, and honestly, it's a tried and true video game condition where you fight a guy, you beat a guy, and then he shows up again, but he's red this time, and it just changes the whole ballpark. Um, I'm going to cheat here. Very is a singular entity, and should not be encountered randomly. And you see, there you go. We don't need the mood. We don't need a mood table as a result there. Barberry is always going to be in the same spot, and he's always going to be, he's always going to be in the like have the same attitude about it. He's guarding it. He is guarding, as we noted before, he is guarding the temple of the poison god, and does not have time for you. The variants and related entries. Let's see. We already had the customization. I was going to say that one I'd have to think more about, but I'd say probably could be given an ability that him synthetic qualities rather than divine slash I'm typing. Oh my gosh, you can tell I'm there we go. Ones and used to represent a sort of automated battle tank. So there we go. If you think about it, the breath weapon, if you did this where you gave him synthetic qualities instead of the divine stuff, the breath weapon could be like a big cannon. The lightning attack could be like a laser at the top. The retributive attacks could be some kind of like spikes on the treads, or even like a kind of kinetic force field or something like that. And just like we did earlier with the Swinehart Cavalier and the Proudhound, just changing a couple of things can basically give you a whole brand new monster. So there we go. We have Borrowberry, and I'm actually pretty fond of this one, as well as the Swinehart Cavalier. So who knows? Maybe I will make a sort of file off the serial number, make a copyright free or a copyright safe version of that particular monster someday and put it in some kind of break adventure at some point. But anyway, thanks again, everybody. That is our monster creation stream. This has again been how to make sort of adversaries and break. I apologize if it was a bit rambling at times. I had a lot to cover, and I wanted to make sure we got something cool out of it. But since we still have a little bit, I do want to leave some time for chat to shoot some questions my way if they'd like. So I did. Gray is correct. I managed 2 hours. I didn't keep it under 2 hours, but I managed exactly 2 hours. I thought that was pretty good. I was trying really hard. But I hope once we get this book into people's hands, I'm really excited to see the kind of stuff people come up with. I'm really hoping to see like other crazy monsters or people to make their own versions of anime or video game or book bosses. I was one monster I almost made for this stream. That would have been a little more non-standard was the Red Bull from The Last Unicorn, as I think that's a particularly cool monster. And actually, that ability to cause terror in things that don't have this that have lower rank than you is definitely an ability the Red Bull would have as well. Um, so, but okay. All right. It looks like chat is actually pretty quiet. So, um, don't know if anybody has any. If nobody has any questions. Oh wait, here we go. Thank you, Funny Hat Necromancer. I appreciate your contributions. About arranging encounters. Since normal bosses are the equivalent of one PC, you could put several of them together to make a really tough encounter, like an opposite adventuring party. Yes, Funny Hat Necromancer. Um, that actually is an intent of that kind of character. And we even have a couple of example adversaries that are essentially sort of uh, very similar or sort of foils to existing player character types. And that if you were wanted to, you could really quickly make a um, sort of quick uh, like an encounter with an opposing group. Yes, Bryberg breaks up. The Chosen One, for example, is a sort of uh, Link from The Legend of Zelda, our Dragon Quest hero kind of individual gone wrong, um, or right, depending on the campaign. But if you were to say stick them with a blaster mage, and maybe one either make a murder mage or have them with a blaster mage and a murder mage or battle butler, you have a nice little party there, and that could make a sort of opposing adventuring party. Uh, and of course, you could easily make your own kind of thing there. Somebody brought up the Houndrel, the sort of cowboy themed Houndrel, which would also make a good addition to that party. Um, and it's actually a favorite thing of mine to do as well. Let's see here too. There are also, and I should show off this guy just because I am a fan. Um, there are adversaries that aren't necessarily meant to be um, and necessarily combat. Other kinds of conflict as well. We've got the undead peddler, which are basically spooky undead guys who are selling stuff in dungeons and stuff. Um, and they aren't really meant for combat, but they can still be. You're still going to meet them in dangerous places, and they might also be accompanied by things that are scary. So even though they're called adversaries, they can cover a lot of different um, things here too. I always like to pair these guys up with either they're hanging around their own, they say stuff like "buy something, will ya," or sometimes they're accompanied by skelemen, um, or they're hiding out in a town or that kind of stuff. Sprash, SP trash can, trash can. Anyway, thank you. I apologize for butchering your name. As games sometimes recycle early tough creatures as later minions, do you have suggestions on how to say recycle a low rank boss or mega boss into a higher rank but lower tier creature? So actually, this is kind of covered in the rules. To do that, you kind of go back to this adversary table right here, um, and say you have, and basically just look at the reduced rank and adjust accordingly. So for example, say I wanted to make Borrowberry, but I wanted to make Chibi Borrowberry instead, who was a smaller, less fearsome version of his Borrowberry-ish himself. I might reduce his rank to 4, so half, which would force him back down into boss. I'd take away his legendary ability, and I'd probably not only lower his aptitudes and attack, I'd probably add some more limitations to his other abilities. So basically, moving up and down this adversary table kind of gives you a good guideline to strengthen and weaken monsters as you need. I feel like that fellow would have a habit of ending conversations with crazy laughter. Yes, fair. I agree, Brebarg. But yeah, So as noted, if you wanted to make small borrowberry, like maybe make a green or blue one that's a little less scary than the regular one, that's how I would do it. I should put examples. That's a good one though. I should put examples of that in an adventure at some point. Um, Also noted, I should say too, um, it notes here how you can make a species large or small, and to change an existing monster. So we can have the pit mange instead of the mange bandit, um, and that's a good way to kind of make a really quick, easy, varied group as well. So but yeah, no, that's a. I think also too, as mentioned, abilities are pretty modular. Um, One thing I think would be really useful and really or one thing I hope is really useful for players and GMs alike, is this kind of ability to understand that you can kind of tweak and stretch and move these abilities around to make your own custom stuff. Um, Something I'd really love to go into, I didn't want to put this in the basic rules, but something I'd really love to go into is I think it would be fun for players to have guidelines to learn abilities from game master characters and even like adversaries and entities and stuff that they wouldn't normally be able to with their calling, just because I think that's a cool thing to put in a game. Um, and similarly, you can take calling abilities and sort of tweak them a bit to put together them to adversaries, or really just give them wholesale to adversaries. Um, I have, for example, there are certain monster types that even say if you want to advance this. I mentioned the murder maids. The murder maids at the bottom mention that if you increase their rank and give them murder princess abilities, this would represent a more powerful variant of said adversary. So um, there's a lot. The term I use a lot, I used to say Lego set, but the problem with Lego set is again that's copyrighted. So let's say building blocks, that toy chest kind of thing. I like to think of this game of Break as being assembled like that, right? You have an instruction manual that tells you how the stuff is supposed to go together, but the individual pieces are all laid out there. So if you want to pull one free and use it for your own devices, you can. And that's kind of um, the prevailing philosophy I have for most of the stuff here. But yeah, all right then. Um, anyway, thank you again for listening to the stream. I hope everyone had a nice time. I'll probably do another one um, as we get closer and closer to playtesting and release. So look forward to that. I hope everybody has a really great night.